Have you ever had something suddenly change in your life? A favorite perk taken away, a familiar routine disrupted, and felt a wave of frustration or anger? Maybe it was a rewards program at your favorite store, a benefit at work, or even a small perk on your credit card. Whatever it was, you probably didn't just evaluate the new situation. You compared it to what you had before, right? Today, we're diving into why that reaction is so powerful and how understanding it can help us make better decisions. Spoiler alert, it's not the change itself that matters most, but the difference, the delta between what was and what is. The status quo massively impacts how we feel about a given situation. If someone makes a change that disrupts that, or if we make a change that impacts someone else's routine, we could be in for a much more powerful emotional reaction. Rather than look at the new state's actual value, it's the delta that matters more. This isn't entirely logical, but it sets up our initial response to any change. As humans, we're creatures of habit. Most of us love routine's power, comfort, and reassurance. I have two examples that illustrate changes in my life that disrupted my status quo. The first is with my beloved Chase Sapphire Reserve credit card. A few months ago, they removed one of my favorite perks, Priority Pass restaurants. If you're unfamiliar with it, Priority Pass is a membership that grants access to many global airport lounges. To me, it's a game changer and it absolutely improves the overall air travel experience versus just waiting in the general boarding area, to the point where I actually enjoy hanging out in airports. Until July 1st, 2024, Chase also included Priority Pass restaurants in the Sapphire Reserve's benefits. This perk enabled me to go to select restaurants at airports and receive a $28 credit or $56 if I was traveling with somebody. I'm currently traveling a decent amount, and a few decent restaurants were included in my common airports. These spots were better options for me than the included clubs to get a free lunch and maybe a free drink. At a little over a trip a month, this was worth about $500 annually to me. On July 1st, they removed that perk. No more free tacos and beer at Landry's at IAH. Yes, I still have lounge access and decent alternatives, but they aren't as good, and it was a change from what I was used to. Free tacos was my status quo. I'm confident this was a cost-saving effort to improve profitability of Chase's flagship premium travel card. However, because they disrupted my status quo, they triggered a moment for me to analyze whether the $550 annual fee was still worth it relative to their competitors. I hadn't really done this analysis in any detail since I received the card about 8 years ago and happily paid probably $4,000 in annual fees. Because they made a change, even to a minor perk, it triggered an evaluation. Ultimately, I'm keeping the card as it's still vastly superior to the alternatives for my situation, even losing this $500 annual benefit. However, they risked losing a loyal customer because of this minor disruption. Other customers who aren't as diligent about calculating the absolute benefit may have made a visceral reaction that Chase doesn't care about me as much and I'm changing to American Express. Even if the customer does stay, this minor change becomes a mental bookmark of removing value. Because of that change, customers gain a heightened awareness of other changes that further dilute their status quo perception. If you're the one making the change, realize that any disruption breaks a key aspect of your value proposition, acceptance of the status quo. Doing nothing takes no energy. Evaluating a new coffee shop, credit card offer, or finding a new job requires effort. One of the most powerful forces is our resistance to change. In science, we call it the energy of activation barrier. Think of this like a boulder on the ledge of a big cliff. It's stable right now, but if you push it over the little lip on the edge, it'll naturally roll to a more stable state. Even if it's a completely unstable situation, the status quo keeps it where it is until it gets that little nudge. Any change or disruption from the status quo might be that nudge. This happens all the time in our lives. You get a new credit card offer in the mail or a flyer from a new pizza place that just opened up. It's not enough for that offer to be the same as what we currently have, or even just a little bit better. It needs to be enough better to encourage you to be willing to put the mental energy into changing your routine. Can you think of examples in your life where you had an opportunity that was just a bit better, but you said, nah, I'm good. I'll just stay with what I'm doing today. When the change comes from the other side and it's made to you, that's a big push in energy. Suppose the situation is perceived as worse or the removal of a benefit. In that case, it may trigger a more elaborate evaluation than sticking with the status quo. My other example goes back a few years to my time at Clorox. During most of my career, Clorox followed a seniority approach to vacation time. Start with 2 weeks of PTO, add an extra week at 5 years, 10 years, and then move up to 5 weeks of vacation once you hit 20 years with the company. In addition, employees could carry a balance of up to 150% of their annual allowance. As I was past my 10-year mark, I had 4 weeks of vacation every year and could bank up to 6 weeks of time off. One June morning, we had an all-company meeting that, effective immediately, they were switching to an unlimited vacation policy. I'll ignore commentary on why unlimited PTO systems are a trap, and research shows that employee well-being is worse under these systems, and I'll focus my attention on my and others' reaction to the change. First, I had about 4 weeks of time saved due to several canceled vacations in 2020 and 2021. As part of the announcement, they shared that only employees with over 160 hours banked would receive any payout of the accrued time. Being just under that threshold, my perception was that my employer just stole $14,000 of my earned benefits. I personally viewed my 4 weeks of vacation time as permission of what I was expected to take off each year. In the case of a major life event, I already had permission to take that saved time off. This change was nearly universally worse for me than my prior state. Other long-tenured employees felt the same. We ignored that this policy was a growing trend, thus becoming the new status quo in the US workplace. If we were to quit and go somewhere else, the benefits would be nearly identical. Therefore, this was just our new reality and how time off has become to be viewed in corporate America. It's worse, but what are you going to do? However, listening in the hallways, this new policy was very exciting to those just starting with the company. Unlimited was better than 2 weeks, and not having lost bank time off, there was no perceived downside. Again, I'll ignore the research that this is still worse psychologically, but in their minds, their vacation situation improved. They judged the change relative to their previous status quo. I've seen other companies make changes such as new retirement programs, changing health insurance providers, or in the news a lot lately, reversing work from home policies. Consistently, individuals evaluate the difference compared to their previous situation versus just focusing on the absolute value of the new system. Can you think of any situations where you experienced a change like this? What was your initial reaction? If you're a business owner, benefits manager, or just someone considering making a change that will impact those around you, realize that your expected results aren't just the money saved with the new program. It's the risk of losing employees, customers, or negatively impacting relationships due to disrupting their status quo. Even a minor change like removing a $28 restaurant credit might be enough to cause loyal members to reassess their situation. Momentum is a powerful force that keeps us loyal out of sheer laziness. If you do something that disrupts that status quo, you have unintended consequences that change the overall value. In the case of businesses, realize the implications of what you're doing. If you remove a benefit, that may appear as an immediate cost savings or improvement. However, recognize how that change may be received by your most loyal customers. They may use that minor disruption as the moment to evaluate their status quo. If they choose to go to a competitor, you lose a customer. So looking at your delta, it's not just the savings from the change. It's the savings from the change minus the risk of losing the lifetime value of your current customers and the cost of acquiring new customers interested in your new status quo. Like anything in business, it's the total value that matters, and you need to consider the secondary consequences of your decisions. Also, recognize who the change impacts the most in these cases: your most loyal employees and customers. Yes, the change may be better to attract new customers or employees or save money going forward, but it's potentially at the cost of those who are used to how things work. You need to consider the absolute lifetime value impact of potentially alienating your most loyal individuals. As individuals who have change thrust upon us, we must be aware of our bias. We need to acknowledge that our initial emotional reaction is a tendency to judge the relative impact of the change, particularly when things seem worse. We need to reserve our visceral response. We can take a step back and assess the overall situation, ignoring the previous state since it's no longer available, and consider not the change from before, but the absolute value of the new state and comparing it to the next best alternative. If a coffee shop eliminates its loyalty card program right when you're one punch away from a free coffee, it's not the lost value from the incomplete card. It's the holistic value of how much you enjoy coffee from your regular coffee shop versus the price, convenience, and quality of your next alternative. If your employer changes its bonus structure, it's not compared to what you received last year. It's about where else you could take your talents and how the overall value proposition compares to that alternative. From a behavioral economics perspective, these examples demonstrate several phenomena. The most obvious is the status quo bias, where people are resistant to change just because it's what they're used to, even if the alternative is better. In the examples I shared here, the outcome was arguably worse for certain individuals, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes we have the bias to resist change, even if it's better for us. Again, it's focusing on the absolute value compared to the alternative that matters, and we need to get past our rock getting nudged off of its cozy cleft on a cliff. The second phenomenon I'll highlight is the endowment effect. Once we have something, we tend to value it more than if we never had it in the first place. Often, this effect is illustrated by giving people things of nominal value like a mug or a pen, and then asking them how much they would be willing to sell it for. Researchers compare that value to individuals who didn't receive the item and ask how much they would be willing to pay to get that item. In a logical world, these prices should be the same. Most people have the same relative utility for a mug. However, just because someone was given a mug tends to make it more valuable to them because they now own it compared to someone who never had it. In the case of change, it's the loss of someone taking away our mug. Just because we had it and experienced the perceived ownership, we potentially value it more compared to its real utility. This would be like someone who rarely used the Priority Pass restaurant perk being extremely disappointed beyond the actual value of the benefit. Once we're given things, we value them more than they're actually worth. Where have you noticed changes like this in your life? Have you been the victim of intense initial adverse emotional reactions to change? What did you do? Were you able to step back and assess the overall value compared to the next best alternative? Or were you stuck focused on the delta between the previous status quo and the new state? Have you been a part of implementing a change like this? And what was the outcome compared to the intended cost savings? Did it work out well for your organization? Or were there unintended consequences more significant than anticipated? I encourage you to do your best to be aware of your biases and think in terms of absolute value, not falling into the trap of comparing to a previous state that's no longer accessible. Change is inevitable, but how we evaluate it makes all the difference. Don't let disruption cloud your judgment and focus on the true value of making informed decisions. Thanks so much for watching. And if you think this was useful, please like and subscribe and consider sharing this with someone who you think might get use out of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and we'll talk again soon.